Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 307. Since the very beginning, when we first started this podcast, I talked about how the financial system and the financial sector is absolutely rotten and corrupt to its core. The money laundering and the financial crimes that take place on a daily basis is enough to make you want to crawl into a hole and never come out again. These same people who are facilitating Jeffrey Epsteins of the world, dictators of the world, and the other corrupt and undesirable pieces of shit that should be on the first rocket into a black hole are also the very same people that are slapping you with predatory loans. The very same people that are foreclosing on your home. These are the people who are the real enemy, folks. And I don't say that lightly. And I don't mean your local bank teller, right? I'm talking about the true masters and manipulators of the monetary system. The Jess Staleys of the world, the Jamie Dimons of the world, the Glenn Dubins of the world. These are the people and their friends in this banking system that has all of us caught up in a modern day form of slavery, basically. These are the real enemies. Not your friend that's voting differently than you. Not your cousin who has a different political opinion. These people, these bankers, these people that facilitate Jeffrey Epstein and other people like him. That's where our focus should be. These are the people that should be held accountable. But no. Instead, what do? We continue to buy into the divisiveness. We continue to buy into the BS. And we give these people a pass because we're way too busy buying into the bullshit gaslighting that they're selling. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the lies, and I'm tired of the control by these people. And in this article we're going to read tonight from Buzzfeed, it is an absolute heart shot to the financial sector and to the criminal activity that they are engaged in on a regular basis. And think about it for a minute, folks, okay? Just look at any president that gets elected in the United States and take a look at their staff and take a look at their appointees and look at how many of the scumbags are from the financial sector. We got to get away from all of this. We got to get away from all of this nonsense. We got to get away from having these sort of people have the sort of control that they have over us. And there has to be some sort of oversight. Because the FinCEN database obviously is not enough. The safeguards that are in place are obviously not enough. These people continuously steal the wealth from the citizens of the nations around the world, and even when they're caught, face no penalties. But now, as things are beginning to change, and the tune is becoming a different one played on the stage, how long are they going to be able to get away with their money laundering, their helping of sex trafficking organizations, them being in bed with cartels? How long are the people going to accept it now that it's all coming out for everybody to see? Our article tonight is from BuzzFeed News. The headline, The FinCEN Files. Thousands of secret, suspicious activity reports offer a never-before-seen picture of corruption and complicity, and how the government let it flourish. Now, we've talked about this a bit here on the podcast, right? I talked to you about the FinCEN database, about SARS, and how that all works in a financial institution, according to Title 31 and the rest of the regulations. So this article is really going to go deep. right? This is going to be an article that goes into it, explains suspicious activity reports, explains in detail why they're so secretive and how they're so secretive. And it's going to show you and explain to you how these banks have been involved in all of the nonsense I've been talking about on this podcast. Here are the people that contributed to this fantastic, incredible report. And I don't say that lightly, right? You folks all know how I feel about the legacy media. And there are very few times that I find myself aligned with Buzzfeed. But when it comes to things like this, it shouldn't matter what your political affiliation is. It shouldn't matter about any of that stuff. We're all getting hosed here, folks, Republican or Democrat alike. If you don't have enough zeros in your bank account, you're getting hosed by these people. So wake up. Please wake up and understand. The people who contributed to this article are Jason Leopold, Anthony Cormier, John Templeton, Tom Warren, Jeremy Singer Vine, Scott Pham, Richard Holmes, Azine Goriashi, Michaela Sala, Tanya Kazareva, and Emma Loop. I'd like to thank all of them personally for this report because it's that important in my opinion. It ties right into what we discuss every single day here on the Jeffrey Epstein Show. It ties into what the survivors talk about as well. We've heard Virginia talk about following the money. We've heard Maria talk about following the money and the other survivors. And you know why? Because when you follow the money, you usually end up at the politician. A huge trove of secret government documents reveal for the first time how the giants of Western banking move trillions of dollars in suspicious transactions, enriching themselves and their shareholders while facilitating the work of terrorists, kleptocrats, and drug kingpins. And the U.S. government, despite its vast powers, fails to stop it. Well, of course they fail to stop it. Their friends are the ones who wrote those laws, right? The scumbags in Congress and the scumbags in the Senate and all of those people who lobby for them. They're the ones who wrote those laws, right? So why would the government try and stop it? Oh, they put things in place like FinCEN and, different, laws like Title 31 and all of that stuff. And sure, it looks good, right? But these people all know the loopholes. And again, remember, it is not about if you're guilty or you're innocent in the United States when you have money, or elsewhere, I'm sure. It is all about the loopholes that their friends put into the laws. So, of course, the U.S. government is not going to stop it. They encourage it. Today, the FinCEN files thousands of suspicious activity reports and other U.S. government documents offer an unprecedented view of global financial corruption, the banks enabling it, and the government agencies that watch as it flourishes. BuzzFeed News has shared these reports with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and more than 100 news organizations in 88 countries. And again, I am usually not a big fan of BuzzFeed. I don't really care for the way they go about themselves, about their business usually, and I'm just not a big fan of this kind of journalism for the most part, the kind that you see in BuzzFeed. But this work they did here, this is some of the best stuff in quite some time since, the Panama Files and WikiLeaks, and this is important stuff, folks. If you really want to know the truth, right? You go right to the source. Look at these documents yourself. Take a look at how these bankers have been screwing you on a regular basis, stealing your wealth with their dumbass plans and their endless wars. These documents, compiled by banks, shared with the government but kept from public view, expose the hollowness of banking safeguards and the ease with which criminals have exploited them. Profits from deadly drug wars, fortunes embezzled from developing countries, and hard-earned savings stolen in a Ponzi scheme were all allowed to flow into and out of these financial institutions despite warnings from the bank's own employees. because it doesn't matter that the law was being broke. It doesn't matter that ill-gotten gains were being shifted around and washed and hidden. It doesn't matter that some poor kid in some developing country had their dreams and their life stolen from them. And that is not hyperbole either, okay? The money that was supposed to go to that community was stolen by some shitbag kleptocrat. And then these bankers, with their big smiles and their veneered teeth, have the audacity to get on that TV and try and distance themselves from Jeffrey Epstein or act like they did nothing wrong. When in reality, we have known that they have been scumbags for quite some time. But now, the smiling white veneers and the $10,000 suit is not enough to hide what you really are, to hide your true face. Money laundering is a crime that makes other crimes possible. Yeah, if it wasn't for the money laundering with Jeffrey Epstein, he would never have the funds to do what he did. And that is why people like Les Wexner are so important to the case, okay? It can accelerate economic inequality, drain public funds, undermine democracy, and destabilize nations. And the banks play a key role. Some of these people in those crisp white shirts and their sharp suits are feeding off the tragedy of people dying all over the world, said Martin Woods, a former suspicious transactions investigator for Wachovia. And again, I filled out a bunch of SARS in my life. In my over 5 years in the sports book and 4 years roughly in a management position there, I filled out multiple SARS. And they go into the database, and then that's it. The government can access them whenever they want. And just at my little operation, we had a whole auditing department that was all over it. So there's oversight here. The oversight people were told specifically to let certain transactions go through. Rather obvious that that's what happened. Laws that were meant to stop financial crime have instead allowed it to flourish. You think so, huh? Oh, I guess that has nothing to do, right, with the fact that these politicians are the ones writing the laws for the loopholes. Just take a look at all of these politicians and their net worth when they stroll their grifting asses into D.C. and then when they leave. How do you accumulate all of that wealth on your salary, sir or madam? What pies do you have your fingers in? So long as banks file a notice that it may be facilitating criminal activity, it all but immunizes itself and its executives from criminal prosecution. That is a fact as well. And that is why it was so important for us to put in those SARs. Not because CG, Cantor, cared about making sure there was no money laundering going on in our sporting accounts. No. It was to protect their own ass. CYA, baby. That's the name of the game in the financial sector. Your house burns down? F you, pay me. Your mother dies? F you, pay me. That's the motto they live by. The suspicious activity alert effectively gives them a free pass to keep moving the money and collecting the fees. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, is the agency within the Treasury Department charged with combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. It collects millions of these suspicious activity reports, known as SARS. It makes them available to U.S. law enforcement agencies and other nations' financial intelligence operations. And that's the whole point of them, right? They collect these SARS. The SARS are put in by employees at these institutions or any place where a significant amount of money is being moved. And then if there is a transaction that is suspicious, it's put into the FinCEN database, and then the agency has access to all of them to distribute how they see fit. It even compiles a report called Kleptocracy Weekly that summarizes the dealings of foreign leaders such as Russian President Vladimir Putin. What it does not do is force the banks to shut the money laundering down. In the rare instances when the U.S. government does crack down on banks, it often relies on sweetheart deals called deferred prosecution agreements, which include fines but no high-level arrests. And this has happened throughout time, right? Just look at what happened during the financial meltdown. None of those banksters went to jail. None of them. While Americans watch their whole entire life savings dwindle before their eyes, these pieces of shit, these scumbags who populate every single president's staff and office and you name it, these people are the ones that were responsible for all of it, yet none of them paid any price. The Trump administration has made it even harder to hold executives personally accountable under guidance by a former deputy attorney, General Rod Rosenstein, that warned government agencies against piling on. Rod the Rat Rosenstein, huh? Another piece of garbage scuzzball. Another person that should never have any power over any single citizen ever again. Another man that thinks it's okay to finagle FISA reports. I have no use for any of the leadership structure at the FBI, the CIA, or any of these other three-letter organizations. But the FinCEN Files investigation shows that even after they were prosecuted or fined for financial misconduct, banks such as JP Morgan Chase, HSBC, Standard Chartered, Deutsche Bank, and Bank of New York Mellon continue to move money for suspected criminals. Boy, it sure sounds like all of those banks where Jeffrey Epstein had a couple of bucks parked, huh? Must be nice. It must be nice to live your life however you want. It must be nice to park your money at one of these banks and have your homie Jess Staley sit on it and have it multiply. It must be nice to be a scuzzbag. Suspicious payments flow around the world and into countless industries, from international sports to Hollywood entertainment to luxury real estate to Nobu sushi restaurants. They filter into the companies that make familiar items from people's lives, from the gas in their car to the granola in their cereal bowl. And that's the thing, right? And that's the rub. All of these people are connected. All of these bankers who were palling around with Jeffrey Epstein are also engaged in all of this other bullshit. I've said it from the beginning. I've never shied away from saying it. And I'll tell you what, it's about time that something like this dropped. When I read the Panama Files, the Panama Papers, I was blown away by what it contained. And people ask me all the time, you go really hard on that money laundering angle, bro. Yeah, because it's a big part of it. There's a lot of people that are not going to get caught up in the criminal indictments as far as the sex trafficking ring goes, even though they should be. So, what do we just forget about it and say, well, that's it. They beat this rap, so let's not get them with anything else? Or do we slap them with these financial crimes, these financial indictments, and at the very least get them to spend some time in jail for that? I know which option I'd go for, and it most certainly is not the one where they don't pay any penalties. If it's good enough for Al Capone, it's good enough for Jess Staley. The FinCEN Files expose an underlying truth of the modern era. The networks through which dirty money traverse the world have become vital arteries of the global economy. They enable a shadow financial system so wide-ranging and so unchecked that it has become inextricable from the so-called legitimate economy. Banks with household names have helped to make it so. BuzzFeed's news investigation shows that Standard Chartered moved money on behalf of Al Zaruni Exchange, a Dubai-based business that was later accused of laundering cash on behalf of the Taliban. During the years that Al Zaruni was a Standard Chartered customer, Taliban militants staged violent attacks that killed civilians and soldiers. Hell of a place, that Standard Chartered, huh? I just want to move my money there. I mean, right now, I'm thinking about moving all of my money there. HSBC's Hong Kong branch allowed WCM 777, a Ponzi scheme, to move more than $15 million, even as the business was being barred from operating in 3 states. Authorities say the scam stole at least $80 million from investors, mainly Latino and Asian immigrants, and the company's owner used the looted funds to buy 2 golf courses, a 7,000 square foot mansion, a 39.8 carat diamond, and mining rights in Sierra Leone. Boy, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? This guy's living it up, huh? 15 million, 80 million from investors that were mainly Latino and Asian immigrants in Hong Kong. And then I'm going to get me 2 golf courses, a 7,000 square foot mansion, some mining rights in Sierra Leone. Boy, I'm really living it up. And these are the same people who were in bed with Jeffrey Epstein. Bank of America, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, American Express, and others collectively processed millions of dollars in transactions for the family of Viktor Krapunov, the former mayor of the Kazakhstan's most populous city, even after Interpol issued a red notice for his arrest. Krapunov, who had already fled to Switzerland and who claims the allegations are politically motivated, was later convicted in absentia on charges that included bribe-taking and defrauding the city through the sale of public property. These people are just fantastic that they're doing business with, right? The banks mentioned in this story said they could not comment on specific transactions due to bank secrecy laws. Their statements can be found here. There's a hyperlink in this article, and I highly suggest that you follow all the hyperlinks here. Check out all of this stuff for yourself. It's very important to what we discuss, folks. You know, it's very rare that I discuss anything on here that is not based in Jeffrey Epstein or one of the key players. But the banking system, this was the swamp in which they were able to operate and move and procreate. So it's very important that we discuss this. By law, banks must file suspicious activity reports when they spot transactions that bear the hallmarks of money laundering or other financial misconduct, such as large round number transactions or payments between companies with no discernible business relationship. SARs are not by themselves evidence of a crime, but FinCEN's director, Kenneth Blanco, has called them vital for law enforcement investigations. Right. I'll tell you what, they certainly aren't a crime in themselves. If I'm able to write one up, or one of my ticket writers are able to write one up in the sports book, we certainly aren't law enforcement agents. Our job is to make sure that we write the SAR and we put it in the system so that in the event that something goes south, the federal government can't come to us and say, well, you didn't file a SAR on this. And again, it's all about cover your ass. Prior to this reporting, very few SARs had ever been revealed. The FinCEN files encompass more than 2,100. Information from millions of these documents feeds into a single database through which law enforcement officers can summon detailed financial information with a few keystrokes. That's what I was telling you about. So from my office, I was able to file this stuff, right? I throw it in the auditing bag, and the auditors would do what they do, and they send it on in. So I'm sure it's pretty similar here in these banks. The FinCEN files opens a rare window into the vast system of financial intelligence unmatched in the world, but all unknown to the public. The SARs themselves are so closely held that members of the public cannot obtain them through records requests or subpoenas, and banks are not allowed to even confirm their existence. That's crazy. We weren't allowed to talk about them either, but we never really had, at least me anyway, I never had an instance of a guest asking about a SAR or anything like that. They asked me how to structure all the time. Had a Title 31 structure to make sure that they didn't go over the $10,000 mark, of course. But as far as SARs, not very many people are aware of them even. For more than a year, Buzzfeed News and its partner news organizations across the world mined the information on these tens of thousands of pages to map more than 200 transactions. Here's an explanation of how we did it. There's a hyperlink where you can click on the hyperlink and it'll go into the nuts and the bolts on how they compiled all of this and mined the information to get this report. In all, suspicious activity reports in the FinCEN files flagged more than $2 trillion in transactions between 1999 and 2017. Western banks could have blocked almost any of them, but in most cases they kept the money moving and kept collecting their fees. That's crazy to think that in the process of them compiling this report, they probably came across a couple of SARs that I have compiled in my time. That's pretty cool. Suspicious activity reports are written by the bank's financial crime watchdogs or compliance officers, who are often parked in remote offices and left to make sense of a vast number of transactions with very few resources, writing SARs with little research or verification. See, like I said, at my place, we would write the SARs up as the frontline employees and then send them up to auditing. Buzzfeed News research went much further, including reams of internal bank data, thousands of pages of public records, hundreds of interviews with sources across the globe, dozens of Freedom of Information Act filings, 5 public records lawsuits, and requests for 3 federal courts to unseal records, all to piece together the intricacies of a financial system that is largely hidden. So they really went for the gusto, man. BuzzFeed really went all in on this. This is a project that's taken them, obviously, a couple of years, according to them. And it is something that is very important, especially for our investigation. BuzzFeed is not publishing the SARs in full because they contain information about people or companies that are not under suspicion, but who were swept up in the bank searches. A subset of the documents is being published with redactions to support reporting in specific stories. So I guess they went through them with their lawyers and figured out what could be included and what should not be included, would be my guess. After the Treasury Department received detailed questions about the FinCEN files investigation, the agency released a statement saying that it was aware that various media outlets intend to publish a series of articles based on unlawfully disclosed suspicious activity reports. It continued. The unauthorized disclosure of SARs is a crime that can impact the national security of the United States, compromise law enforcement investigations, and threaten the safety and security of the institutions and individuals who file such reports. Oh, what a bunch of BS. Breaking news, folks, okay? It is not national security. That is what they always say when they don't want me or you to take a look at what's going on. An absolute joke. Give me a break. And I also find it a bit ironic, though, as well, because you have a lot of people, BuzzFeed types, the people that read BuzzFeed, the people that like BuzzFeed, that'll tell you, well, the WikiLeaks files, those were hacked, and nobody should even have seen those. And it's not about the content to some people, right? It's the fact that they were released. And I always found that weird. I think that any information that's released that can better the public's information and understanding of what their government is doing is a good day for freedom, be it the WikiLeaks or be it these FinCEN reports. The agency announced that it was referring the matter to the Department of Justice and the Treasury Department's Office of Inspector General. Yeah, that's going to work out well, huh? I'm sure that they're going to do a great job because the Inspector General's office really does a bang-up job with every report it does, right? What a joke. That office is so ineffectual. In a subsequent letter, FinCEN's general counsel said that disclosure of SARs can make banks less willing to file them, which could mean law enforcement has fewer potential leads to stop crimes like human trafficking, child exploitation, fraud, corruption, terrorism, and cyber-enabled crime. Such bullshit. No more nonsense from these banks. I will no longer accept it. I will continue to call it out, and I will continue to magnify their transgressions on whatever platform I am provided for the rest of my life. I don't care if it's me and my coworker sitting at the table at lunch. I am going to be rambling on and whinging about how evil these banks are and how crippling they have been to society and people actually getting ahead in life. Finson did not respond to repeated invitations to discuss security concerns. Senator Ron Wyden, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which requested some of these SARs, said the Finson files investigations reinforces the fact that we now have two systems of law enforcement and justice in the country. Hey, who else says that all the time? What do you know? Well, maybe Mr. Wyden is listening to the podcast, because the two-tier justice system is rather obvious for anyone paying attention. Drug cartels move millions through U.S. banks. Poor people go to jail for possession. If you're wealthy and well-connected, you can figure out how to do an enormous amount of harm to society at large and ensure that it accrues to enormous financial benefit for all of you. Folks, look, I don't know how much more clear I can be here on this podcast, and I implore all of you to take a look at your own behavior if you're engaged in this. The political nonsense, the using of serious issues as political cudgels, trying to score points for one side or the other. It is not good for any one of us. And we see it all the time here, right? We see it all the time. People will defend even the most scummiest of the scum if they feel like it's someone on their political party side. And it's just magnified at a level right now that is just disgusting. Guess what, folks? A scumbag is a scumbag. It doesn't matter what the letter next to their name reads. Robert Mazur, a former federal special agent and an expert in money laundering, said that making this material public could enhance national security, aid future investigations, and encourage institutions to more consistently adhere to SAR filing requirements, and will hopefully get people who are in a position of power to correct an apparent systemic failure. Look, the only way that we could do that is if we voted new people in. And unfortunately, in a lot of these districts, people won't do it. I mean, do we really need Nancy Pelosi in Washington, D.C. for 30, 40 years? Do we need Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch, Mr. Cocaine Mitch himself in D.C. for all of these years? There was never supposed to be a political class, folks. You were supposed to go there, do your job, and then get back home to your farm or your bakery or your pharmacy or whatever it may be. Now, average people aren't going to D.C. to represent us. It's more of the scumbags who are in this club that we all say that we hate, yet we continue to re-elect them. Based in the United Arab Emirates, Mazaka General Trading presented itself to the world as a wholesaler. But between March 2013 and April 2014, the company received nearly $50 million from five companies involved in a Russian money laundering ring that manipulated international stock trades. In May and June 2014, it received more than $4 million from a Singapore company that appears barely even to exist. Does all of this ring as something that sounds familiar to you with our case that we cover, the Jeffrey Epstein case? Banks coming back to life, money being moved here to a bank that doesn't exist there. Boy, it's almost like they're all working from the same playbook, huh? It was also sending and receiving money from British firms located at 175 Darks Lane, one of the world's most notorious addresses for shell companies, which are a common tool to hide ownership. Boy, isn't that fantastic. These transactions by Mazaka General Trading, which the Treasury Department later declared to be part of the Kanani money laundering network, a group that has financed terrorism and drug cartels around the globe, involved businesses and people far from the shores of the United States. But as the money pinged around from one bank to another, it was all being tracked and it would all be reported to the Treasury Department. And the Treasury Department, they don't care, right? What are they going to do? They're being told by their handlers, their bosses in Congress and the Senate, to stop the shit. Because the US dollar is the lifeblood of international finance, the common denominator between the world's disparate currencies, banking customers around the world needs access to it. But only select banks are licensed to conduct dollar transactions. So smaller banks in other countries partner with larger institutions which exchange their customers' pesos, yuan, or dirham for greenbacks. For a fee, the arrangement, known as correspondent banking, helps keep the global economy humming. Yeah, and it also helps them cover up their vast financial crimes. I don't like international banking, all right? Is that clear? I wish we had more community banking. And in fact, I practice what I preach. I don't bank with one of these banks. I use a federal credit union, a localized federal credit union here in town, because I'm not going to be part of this shit. I'm not going to be part of this financial douchebaggery anymore. And as far as credit cards go, those are on the way out as well. As they pass through U.S. banks, these transfers give the U.S. Treasury Department a vantage that no other country has. It shares some of that information through the Egmont Group, a little-known coalition of financial intelligence units from more than 150 countries and territories. SARS have provided Egmont members with financial details that would be otherwise unattainable, such as those concerning former Olympic Committee member Lamine Diak, who has been sentenced to prison for crimes connected to the Russian doping scandal, and the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who was sanctioned by the U.S. 2 years ago. Deripaska has sued the U.S. government, maintaining that he is an innocent victim of politics. Isn't it funny how they always revert to that? Oh, I'm an innocent victim of politics. Bah. And that's another problem with the device of politics, right? It becomes an absolute game, right? A game of absolutes, I guess I should say. Either you're with us or you're against us. There's no more room for nuance. There's no more room for different ideas. It's all or nothing. And I just can't stand it. But this Deripaska character, yeah, I'm sure it was because of politics, buddy. Sure. But it gives him that inroad, right? Oh, it's political. And that's a lot of these people use that. Oh, it's because of the political divisiveness that I'm being attacked. Yeah, right. You're being attacked because you're an absolute scumbag. That ever occur to you, buddy? But if the database is a powerful asset to law enforcement investigations, to privacy advocates, it is a nightmare of overreach. Congress created the current SAR program in 1992, making banks the front line in the fight against money laundering. But Michael German, a former FBI special agent, who is a national security and privacy expert, said that after 9/11, the SAR program became more about mass surveillance than identifying discrete transactions to disrupt money launderers. This is one thing that I used to bring up as well when we would have meetings about this kind of stuff at my old position. I used to ask all the time, how can we be in charge of something like this? I don't know if someone's laundering money. How am I supposed to know where somebody gets the money from, right? And it got to a point where we would have to ask questions about where the money originated from. It was very uncomfortable. And again, they would make us do this sort of thing at a place like a sports book, but at a bank, forget it. Do whatever you want. It's the wild, wild west. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, right? Today, he said, the data is used like the data from other mass surveillance programs. Find someone you want to get for whatever reason, then sift through the vast troves of data collected to find anything you can hang them with. And that is a concern, right? I'm very cautious of that kind of shit. Very cautious about privacy issues and the way that the government handles that sort of thing. Look, if the government wants to go after you, they are going to go after you. But if you're Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell, now you're going to get a pass probably. In 2017, when U.S. congressional committees began investigating the last presidential election and other matters, they, too, turned to the Treasury Department database. They requested SARS on Deutsche Bank, which had loaned Trump money. Christopher Steele, the former MI6 agent who wrote the so-called Trump dossier, an array of Russian oligarchs, Trump's former campaign chairperson Paul Manafort, and even a small casino in the Pacific run by a former Trump employee. All told, they were looking for information on more than 200 entities. By the way, while we're here, Christopher Steele is an absolute tool and a liar, and he sowed some real bad seeds of distrust in this country. There's a lot of things we could have went after Trump for, right? And his financials were absolutely fair game. The Russia angle sunk it all, and it did a lot more harm than it did good. And it also gave Trump a better chance of winning this re-election. I know a lot of people don't like to hear that shit. The people that are hiding in their echo chambers still, but those are the facts, folks. The facts on the ground. FinCEN unearthed tens of thousands of pages of documents. Those documents, along with a few additional SARs requested by federal law enforcement authorities, make up the majority of the FinCEN files. Some were never turned over to the committee that requested them. A person familiar with the matter blew the whistle to multiple members of Congress. Look, I've said it from the beginning. If you wanted to go after Donald Trump, the way to do it was through the financials. You know that this guy has been involved with some pretty shady people as a construction magnate. You know that the mafia in New York is involved in every single construction project. So I never understood the whole entire weird-ass Russian angle. It was a waste of time, money, and resources. The collection does not include any SARs about Trump's finances. A source familiar with the matter told Buzzfeed News that FinCEN's database did not contain SARs on either Trump or the Trump Organization. Well, that doesn't shock me, right? Pretty powerful guy like Trump. I'm sure he had his henchmen roll in there and tell them, look, make sure that nobody knows about these transactions, all right? Folks, and for those of you on the other side, on the right, that are in with this hero worship of Trump, you got to stop that shit. Trump is just a regular dude like anyone else, puts his pants on one leg at a time like any of us. He is a great character. He is capable of being involved in any and all of this. The financial crimes that we're talking about here, every single person in so-called polite society in New York should be looked at. Every last one of them. And though the documents show suspicious payments to people in Trump's orbit before and after key moments in the 2016 presidential campaign, they do not provide direct information on any election interference. Oh my God, that's because the election interference, forget it, that's for a whole different time. Anyway, my point still stands. The SARs that these banks are supposed to be putting into these databases can easily just be destroyed by people within the oversight room. It's all about the people on top. What sort of directions are these people giving their auditing department? And if they're giving their auditing department orders to destroy documents, then somebody in that auditing department needs to be turned so that they can testify against those who are trying to destroy government documents. Because the searches were so broad, however, they revealed something that most in Congress hadn't even been looking for. Evidence that the world's biggest banks kept doing business with clients that they themselves suspected were facilitating terror and corruption. The information was laid out in transaction by transaction, and it had been there all along. And, I think Congress has wasted a lot of time in the past 10, 15 years with the nonsense. Don't you think that they would have been we would have been better served as the country and the people within the country if Congress would have focused more on what's going on in this banking sector? I mean, you would think after the collapse in 2008, 2009, that they would be all over this shit. But they weren't. They're too busy worrying about who's doing steroids in baseball. And they're too worried about who's doing what here and who's doing this there. And you said this bad word. Meanwhile, we're all getting robbed by these banks on a regular basis. And not only robbed, they're facilitating some of the world's worst criminals and some of the worst crimes you can possibly imagine. And you mean to tell me that Congress missed that? Well, maybe if they were focused on actually making our lives better, they wouldn't have. FinCEN received more than 2 million SARs last year. That number has nearly doubled over the past decade as financial institutions have faced mounting pressure to file and the volume of international transactions has grown. Over the same period, FinCEN's staff has shrunk by more than 10%. Sources there say most SARs are never even read, let alone acted upon. Again, it's all a joke, right? It's all a big game of WWE. Me and you got to do the right thing. We got to make sure we're doing the right thing. But them, screw it. Unless you get on the wrong side of them politically, then you better believe they're digging into the FinCEN database looking for your paperwork. Meanwhile, experts say some banks treat SARs as kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card, filing alerts about a huge array of transactions without actually moving to halt them. In some cases, banks filed numerous reports on the same clients, detailing their suspected crimes over the course of years while continuing to welcome their business. Well, isn't that nice? And guess what? What are the repercussions for these banks? Nothing. Where are the congressional hearings dragging all of these banksters in front of them? They're not happening. You know why? Because these same banksters are the ones bankrolling your favorite politician that you're arguing with your cousin on Facebook about. Doesn't seem so important when you look at it like that, does it? By December 2013, JP Morgan Chase had filed at least 8 SARs on accounts and companies controlled by Manafort, flagging more than $10 million according to a FinCEN research report. Manafort, who went on to become Trump's campaign chair, was convicted of bank and tax fraud in 2018. Boy, that Paul Manafort sure was and sure is a hell of a guy, huh? He wasn't involved in any kind of douchebaggery. No, none at all. Paul Pelletier, a former senior Justice Department lawyer who once led the agency's fraud unit, said that approach makes a mockery of the system. You can't just file SAR after SAR after SAR without eventually violating the money laundering laws, he said. You cut them off and drop them as clients, but you don't keep taking their money. And that's what they did with Jeffrey Epstein, right? They just kept taking his money. Oh, I'm sure there were a ton of SARs. I'm sure there were a bunch of them. 97 transactions, $7,500 transactions. Yeah, that probably would elicit a SAR or two. But yet, nobody did shit to stop them. Nobody stepped up to the plate. Nobody had the courage to say this is wrong. Despite the bank's sweeping powers to investigate account holders, the FinCEN files investigation reveals that major financial institutions often fail to perform the most basic checks on their customers, such as verifying where a business is located when someone opens a new account. The lapses allow criminal groups to hide behind shell corporations, registered with no identifying details about their ownership, and slide the proceeds of their crimes into the global financial system. And once they're in there, folks, poof, lost just like that and washed. But don't you try it. Don't try and be a money launderer. Don't try and wash any money. You better pay taxes on everything you do. You make a transaction with your neighbor where you trade him one of your chickens for some milk, you better damn well believe the government wants their cut. But if you're one of these rich billionaires or millionaires, it's just a wink, wink, nod, nod. In many cases, the banks appear to have no idea whatsoever whose money they are moving. When investigators for HSBC's American operations asked their colleagues in Hong Kong for the name of the person who owned TradeLeader, a company that had moved more than $500 million through the bank in less than 2 years, the answer they got was none available. The company would reportedly emerge as an important hub in the so-called Russian laundromat, a sprawling scheme in which wealthy Russians facilitated by banks secretly moved their money into the West. You know, Hong Kong is a pretty interesting place in this conversation as well, right? We know that Les Wexner had big-time ties to Hong Kong. We know about the Hong Kong Express. So I think that there's a little bit more there with Les Wexner as well, and I wonder if anyone has ever SAR'd any of his transactions. After scandals like the Russian laundromat, federal prosecutors have made big pronouncements about forcing meaningful change. Addressing anti-money laundering conference in 2015, Leslie Caldwell, then the head of the Justice Department's criminal division, said that when it came to getting banks to clean up their acts, deferred prosecution agreements, which typically involved a fine and a probationary period, can often accomplish as much as, and sometimes even more, than we could from a criminal conviction. Yeah, right. Shut up, liar. Leslie Caldwell should never have another job where she prosecutes criminals. You know why? Because she's friendly with them, obviously. Can often accomplish as much and sometimes even more than a criminal conviction. I have news for you. Send one of these bankster bitch-ass punks to the Hooskow for 25 years and throw away the key, and let's see how quickly his buddies are still trying to make the same kind of moves. But the FinCEN Files investigation shows something very different. Banks often get to the end of their agreement without actually fixing the problems. Then, instead of getting the prosecution that they had been threatened with, they just get another chance, sometimes another. In 2012, HSBC faced a historic crisis. After permitting narco-traffickers to launder money and conducting business in off-limits countries such as Sudan and Myanmar, the bank was fined $1.9 billion. It promised to change its ways, and to hold it to that promise, the government installed an independent monitor to keep close watch. But the FinCEN Files investigation shows HSBC continued banking and profiting from the same kinds of customers that got it in trouble in the first place, such as Panamanian import-export firm that the Treasury Department later said was laundering money for drug kingpins. And the band just plays on for these people. No punishments ever are handed down the line if you're a bankster. If you want to get into a life and lead the life of crime and never have to worry about getting in trouble for it, forget the mafia. Forget trying to join a drug cartel or your local neighborhood gang. Go get yourself a financial degree and become a bankster, because it's legalized criminality. JP Morgan Chase got a deferred prosecution deal of its own. For years, it was the primary bank of the world's biggest Ponzi schemer, good old Bernie Madoff. Despite multiple warnings from its own employees, the bank never filed a suspicious activity report on him and allegedly collected $500 million in fees. Isn't that nice, huh? $500 million in stolen fees. For punishment, the bank was required to pay a $1.7 billion fine and promised to improve its money laundering defenses. But after it settled the Madoff case, the bank's own investigators said they suspected it had opened its accounts to an alleged Russian organized crime figure who is known for drug trafficking and contract murders, as well as business ties to the repressive North Korean regime, which the U.S. has placed off limits. These are all of the banks that were taking Jeffrey Epstein's money as well. So for anyone to say to themselves, man, how could these people be in bed with this sex trafficker, this kid toucher? To them, it's all about the moolah, right? The means justifies the end. How often do we discuss that here? And we see it time and time again. It happened at Standard Chartered, too. Last year, the government amended its 2012 deferred prosecution agreement after the bank was found to have continued clearing transactions for individuals and businesses in off-limits countries, primarily Iran. The bank paid fines totaling $1.1 billion to U.S. and U.K. authorities and extended the terms of the deferred prosecution agreement for the sixth time in the space of 7 years. The bank apologized for its violations and control deficiencies, but promised that none had occurred after 2014. Somehow, I highly doubt that. Standard Chartered is another scumbag institution, another bank that has no shame, no compunction to dealing with people like this, and they certainly aren't going to clean up their act on their own. I don't think that there's any penalty that's good enough besides shutting these places down. The FinCEN files documents show Standard Chartered processed hundreds of millions of dollars for companies it suspected were circumventing sanctions against Iran until at least 2017. Since 2010, at least 18 financial institutions have received deferred prosecution agreements for anti-money laundering or sanctions violations, according to an analysis by Buzzfeed News. So there goes the whole entire thing that the deferred prosecution agreements are better than real prosecutions in criminal time. There goes that argument right out the window. If that was the case, these 18 institutions wouldn't have still been involved in this shit, and they wouldn't have received these deferred prosecution agreements, okay? Jail time for all of them. If the government wanted to, experts in financial crime say, it could stop the dirty money coursing through the big banks, as well as the vast array of criminal activity it funds. Oh, well, hold on. Why would they do that? The government itself they're enriching themselves off of the back of these scumbags. We all know that. We all know the people that are paying for these elections. These bagmen aren't good people. You have the Kochs on one side, people like Soros on the other, and then the American people in the middle getting screwed once again. One step would be to require companies to disclose their owners to the Treasury Department rather than allowing people to hide behind a shell company. That needs to happen right away. Lawmakers are debating a bipartisan bill that could address that for small companies. The National Federation of Independent Business has opposed it, saying it raises privacy issues and would increase costs. Senator Sherrod Brown, who co-sponsored the bill, told Buzzfeed News Congress must act soon because criminals have long been revising, adjusting, and amending their tactics to circumvent our laws. Buddy, Sherrod Brown, you are the criminal, man. Congress, you guys are the criminals. You write the laws. So every time they circumvent one, write a new one that fixes the loophole. But you won't do that. You don't have the courage. You're bringing the bill forward, but are you really fighting for it? How hard are you going for this bill, Sherrod Brown? Greater public accountability could also make a difference. HSBC has fought to keep secret the final report by the monitor that the government installed to watch over the bank during the years of its deferred prosecution agreement. It even took the unusual step of weighing in on a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit when Buzzfeed News sued the Justice Department to release the report. The knowledge that negative reports could become public and potentially damage share prices could impel wayward banks to clean up their acts. Well, we saw that the banks took a licking today on the backside of this report. The financial sector got blasted when stockholders and shareholders saw this shit. Others say the SARs themselves are part of the problem. German, the former FBI special agent, called the idea behind them naive because the largest money laundering operations occur with the cooperation of the financial institutions, or at least some officers within those institutions. The lack of money laundering enforcement had nothing to do with the lack of evidence of suspicious transactions, but a lack of interest by political and law enforcement leadership. Yeah, ding, 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 Mr. German. You're on the right path, sir. You win the prize. That's exactly what it is. Every time you hear one of these congressmen or congresswomen or senators talk shit, like, oh, well, the laws need to be changed. They are the lawmakers. If the laws are shitty and they need to be changed, well, here's an idea. Do your damn jobs. The most powerful way to fix the problem might be the simplest. Arrest the executives whose banks break the law. The bankers will never learn until you're putting silver bracelets on people. Pelletier said, think of the message you're sending to repeat offenders. Yup, 100% agree. Jail time for all of them. If you or I steal, we're going to prison. If they steal, deferred prosecution, no worries. Call Alan Dershowitz. Somebody go and check Martha's Vineyard. We hear the naked volleyball games cracking off. We need his expertise. What a sick, sick group of people and society that we're living in. These guys know what they're doing, said Thomas Nollner, a former regulator with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. You break the law, you should go to jail, period. Yes, I agree, Mr. Comptroller of the Currency. That approach was once the norm. Back in the 80s and 90s, and even the early 2000s, the government went after CEOs all the time, said U.S. District Judge Jed Rakoff, who has been an outspoken critic of weak penalties for white-collar criminals. In the past, the CEOs of Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco were all sent to jail for what they did, he pointed out. Now, that's deterrence. 100%, man. Jail, bro. It's the only way for these people to learn. Take that high, posh profile life, pull the rug out from underneath them, give them a jail cell, a bologna sandwich, and a new cellmate that wants some money on their books too. Rakoff went further. Under U.S. law, a bank that engages in money laundering can literally be forced out of business by the government, and it's kind of surprising that the government hasn't taken that step, given the obvious deterrent effect it would have. They have the perfect chance to do that right here and right now with Jeffrey Epstein. Let's see it. Will the U.S. government protect the people? Will the U.S. government deliver the justice that the survivors and the citizens demand? That remains to be seen. Ultimately, the power to keep criminal profits from being laundered through the U.S. financial system may not reside in the actions of a bank's compliance office or its computer systems or even its executive tier. It may not reside with banking regulators or federal prosecutors or FinCEN. It may not even be a matter of national policy alone. Shutting down wayward banks could have an impact on the whole economy, for the U.S., its major trade partners, and beyond. When other countries find their banks under U.S. scrutiny, they step in. In 2012, Standard Chartered and HSBC were facing criminal prosecution. George Osborne, at the time the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, I don't know what that means, wrote to the chairperson of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner to discuss his concerns that a heavy-handed response could have unintended consequences. He warned of a contagion. The implication? Close one bank and the whole economy could suffer. Prosecutors stood down. And you see who's in charge, folks? If this doesn't show you who the real masters are, if this doesn't explain to you in detail what I have been saying on the podcast for basically a year now, I don't know what will. Mazur, the former federal special agent money laundering expert, says there are a mosaic of reasons why U.S. authorities let the money keep running, but one of them may just be that it finds their way into too many pockets. Even if it's bad wealth, it buys buildings, he said. It puts money into bank accounts. It enriches the nation. In summary, the ends, I guess, justify the means. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on that cesspool of Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. Thanks for sticking in there with me, folks. I know it was a long one tonight, a lot of information to get to, but I really believe that this stuff is super important for our ongoing discussion, and I think it's important that we introduce it to our case. So with that said, I'll be back tomorrow, and we will pick up the conversation then. I hope all of you have a fantastic night.